Chapter 10. On the day they left their house forever, Sumiko put on her mint green school dress. She went outside to see everything for the last time. She wanted to sit amid the kusabana, but didn't want to dirty her dress. Instead, she just stood in the middle of the fields and gazed out at the wheat flowers, at the orderly rows of carnations, and at the ranunculus plants that would bloom through the summer if someone filled the irrigation ditches. The kusabana already seemed a little unruly, and the bathhouse already seemed foreign. The shed just made her sad. Then she thought for the first time in a while of Uncle's special room. Sumiko went into the shed and pushed open the door of Uncle's room. She felt guilty since she'd never been allowed in there. The room was tidy and plain, with a few dead carnations in containers. On the shelves sat several envelopes labeled in Uncle's neat writing and probably filled with seeds. Sumiko picked up the envelopes and smiled weakly. Uncle had named his new strains after members of the family. She looked inside one labeled Stock, Sumiko strain. Auntie was calling for her. Sumiko took the Sumiko strain envelope outside with her. Auntie stood in the middle of the yard. "What have you been doing?" "Getting flower seeds." "Have you finished packing?" Auntie's forehead was a mass of wrinkles. "Almost." Sumiko rushed back inside, where she tucked the seeds into her suitcase. The families were supposed to bring their own linens, and that took up a lot of space. Besides the seeds, Sumiko brought her yellow knife because it was just about the only special possession she had left. She also carried some extra clothes for her brother. She worried because Tak-Tak couldn't carry much. But then she heard Bull saying, "Sumiko can't carry much." Nobody in the neighborhood knew where they'd all end up after the temporary center, but nearly everybody assumed it would be somewhere cold, like where Uncle and Jishan and the other arrested men had been confined after they were processed. Sumiko hoped her entire family would be sent to the same place. Anyway, she had packed all their warmest clothes, boots and heavy sweaters and heavy slacks. Sumiko also had packed 2 school dresses for herself and 2 nice outfits for Tak-Tak. Before they left, Bull brought a box poked through with pinholes. "For the crickets," he said. "The cage is too bulky." He'd attached a string to the box so that Tak-Tak could hang it over his shoulder. The man who was buying their truck had agreed to take them to the street where all the Nikki from the area were supposed to await government transportation to the racetrack. The truck's buyer was a quiet man who seemed a little embarrassed by how little he had paid for the vehicle. He didn't meet anyone's gaze full on. Sumiko, Tak-Tak, and Bull sat in the back with the luggage. She stared at the farm as they drove off. The flower fields rippled like a flag. Probably someone else would be moving in soon. Ichiro said they would not be allowed to return to the coast before the war ended, if ever. If the war lasted for 10 years, she would be 22 at the end. She might already be married and living with her husband's family. Sumiko hoped someone would take over the farm quickly. Otherwise, all that work that they'd done would be wasted. As they drove, Sumiko saw that the community was deserted. Nobody worked the land. No kids played in the yards. No old people sat on their front porches. Cheesecloth shuddered over the lonely fields. In many houses, Sumiko saw signs hanging in the windows. "I am an American." Leaving this way made Sumiko love what she'd always loved. The colors, the smells. But it made her also love what she thought she'd hated. For instance, she often hated the drafts in the bathhouse. But now she remembered how delicious and precious the last vestiges of warmth in the tub had seemed. In the distance, Sumiko spotted several abandoned dogs running through some flowers, smashing them. Humane societies in evacuation areas were supposedly overflowing. Mrs. Ono hadn't been able to find someone to adopt her dog, and she refused to have the animal put down. Instead, she had left several open bags of food in her house and tacked a note about the dog on her front door. Sumiko thought nobody would want a Jap dog. Bull was looking at his hands now, his forehead crinkled between his eyebrows. "Do you think we'll ever come back?" Sumiko said. Bull looked up distractedly. "Probably not." Sumiko stared at her old neighborhood until it disappeared from sight. As they neared the drop-off point, the street grew crowded with Nikki families and their luggage. Sumiko felt panicked, wondering whether, suddenly, her family could just abandon their possessions and simply run. Run and run and run. But to where? The only religious group at a national level speaking up for the Japanese was the Quakers. Maybe her family could find some Quakers and hide out with them. She wondered whether any Quakers lived nearby. She wondered how Baba was doing. Sumiko had tied a tag with their family ID number to Tak-Tak's jacket button. She tightened the string. On the streets, she saw other young children with tags on their buttons. The street was as silent as if it were deserted. All the girls wore their school dresses and their faces looked scared and unhappy, which was exactly how Sumiko felt. When the truck stopped, Bull said to Tak-Tak, "Hold on to Sumiko. Don't let go until we get to the assembly center. Do you hear me?" Tak-Tak nodded. Bull put his hat and jumped off to help Ichiro unload the family's belongings. Bull owned just one hat. Ichiro used to own a dozen, but had kept only the one on his head. It was his most expensive hat, but it looked out of place now. On the sidewalk, Tak-Tak clung to Sumiko and she clung to him. The man buying their truck reached out to shake Ichiro's hand. Ichiro hesitated so slightly that Sumiko did not think the man noticed. They shook hands. "Look, there's Mrs. Ono," said Sumiko. "Mrs. Ono!" The old woman stood alone and crying. Sumiko ran over to take her arm while Ichiro and Bull carried her baggage. As soon as Mrs. Ono reached Auntie, she blurted out, "I hope my dog doesn't eat all his food at once." She sobbed and leaned on Sumiko. Everything was so sad. Sumiko couldn't think of one happy thing. A big rumbling sound was growing louder. Sumiko saw a line of army trucks approaching, and she pulled Tak-Tak tightly to her. "Careful," she said, though the trucks were still far away. When the trucks parked, everybody on the sidewalks surged toward them. Bull and Ichiro helped other people load their things, while Sumiko and Tak-Tak clung to each other on the sidewalk. Sumiko had been watching people climb up when suddenly she realized that she and Tak-Tak were two of the last Japanese standing on the sidewalk. She cried out, "Where is Every?" and then felt herself lifted into the air and into the truck. Then Bull lifted Tak-Tak in and jumped in himself. The truck made a tremendous rumbling noise, as if they were in the center of a thundering cloud. A soldier closed a canvas flap, and darkness enveloped the back of the truck.